Hi, this is Pastor Gerald Mitchell. Um, I was recording from my computer. Unfortunately, my camera is malfunctioning, so now I'm recording from my cell phone. Sorry if things may appear backward. I don't think they are. But this is me responding to two questions. Um, One was you were asking me, would I be a good candidate? Uh, why would I be a good candidate to work at your academy? Um, my previous video uh, really is comprehensive enough by itself, but I've been um I've been mentoring boys for a long time. Uh, since at least 1985, I was engaged in boys clubs and in all the programs in the boys clubs, events, camping, things like that. Uh, Spiritual growth as well. Um, and as a police officer in New York City, yeah, I was doing both. I was ordained in 1985 as a minister, but I, I became a police officer, and um, and I wanted to uh, join the Police Athletic League, which is a program designed for children, and to take them out on all kinds of events, uh, baseball, basketball, football, you name it, chess, hockey, all kinds of things, archery. Uh, we would have events, we would have parties uh, for the children. Um, but what I used to also do as a police officer, I used to go to schools. Um, and in my community and other communities, and I would give speeches to the entire auditorium. And what I was trying to do is show them what I do as a police officer and how I help my community and help boys and girls. And I try to uh, communicate to them that the police department, we're not just there to, arrest people. We're there to help people. That's our job, is to serve, protect, and you know, protect and serve. That's what we do. But we serve our community in many ways. And I'm sure that you're familiar that the police departments are. We go out of our way to do programs for children. Because we want to help them. Before they get into trouble, we want to help them become good people. So I would go to classrooms, give speeches, um, and I would intermingle in there, my spiritual beliefs, because I would tell them I'm also a pastor, that, my connection with God and everything like that, and how I believe in Jesus, and that I would encourage them to, believe in Jesus also. So these are things that I've been doing for years, since 1985. Uh, so usually at the conclusion of my speeches to these auditoriums, I would always I would give out my card to everyone in the auditorium. I'd give them a card, my phone number on it, my email address, what precinct I worked at, and that they can call me anytime. If they were probably having a problem at home, or if they were seeing something outside that was bad, crime being committed, they could call me, and not be afraid. I'm there to help them, you know, and I would close with this. I would tell them, listen, at the end of this speech that I'm giving here, uh, if any of you want to talk to me after this is over, I'd be more than willing. I'll be waiting, you know, to meet you at the door, and if you want to ask me more questions or anything like that, because I've always asked them if they have questions, but some of them are too shy to ask questions in front of everybody. So I would tell them, if you want to talk to me privately, I'm available, and I'd spend all day at the school. Um, and a lot of the kids would want to talk to me afterwards, and sometimes I get to get them together as a group or individually. So, if they want to report problems they might be having at home, I say, listen, I'm available for you. If you want to speak to me, it's confidential. You know, you don't have to worry about me, you know, getting you in any kind of trouble or anything like that. You know, but if they're reporting something criminal, that they're being abused in any way, then that's something I'm going to investigate, or report it to child services, things like that. So I was always concerned about children, because if you see my previous video, I've suffered 100 times trauma that they've suffered. So I've been through a lot. I was abused as a child. I was sexually abused when I was 7 years old. I had to go to court and testify against three teenagers that abused me sexually, and I had to go to court and testify. This is a year after my father left my mother with 6 kids. I was 6 years old. He was an alcoholic, and now I got a mother with no father, and she has no income, and we're poor, and we're living in Brooklyn, New York. Things were very crazy, very violent, and I grew up in an abusive household too, because my mother was very abusive to her children, because she had to be the father and the mother at the same time. So, she used to take the belt to us, and I used to get beatings all the time, so today that would be illegal, but not in the 1960s, no, it wasn't illegal then, in fact, it wasn't even illegal to hit your wife, then, believe it or not. But it's illegal now. But so I've suffered many traumas in my life, so I'm easily able to relate to children and problems that they suffered, and abuses they've been through, or problems they're having at school, problems they're having in their neighborhood, or any problem, whatever problem they're having at all, I was able to relate to, because there wasn't anything that they've been through that I haven't been through myself. And like I said, whatever they've been through, I've suffered probably 100 times worse than they've been through. So I'm well familiar with the problems that children suffer. So, fortunately for me, I was able to, through the grace of God, change my trajectory, because I was a very bad child. Because I'm in a very bad neighborhood, a very, very bad environment. Drugs, alcohol. My father was an alcoholic. And I started doing drugs when I was a kid. I was drinking. I was stealing. I was doing all kinds of bad things. So and I was always getting in trouble. So by the time I was 16 years old, excuse me, my brother died. He was 18 years old, and he died of a drug overdose. So I'm witnessing people dying around me from drugs. like this was normal, but not for me. For me, it wasn't. This was a very traumatic experience. My brother dying. He was 18. I was 16. So by the time I was 17, I knew something. I had to change my life. Because I knew that I'm gonna either end up dead or in jail. One of those are my two options: being dead or in jail. Because of the environment I'm growing up in. So, and the abuse that I'm suffering. And I wasn't doing well in school. I was always disruptive in school. I was rebellious. And you want to talk about a troubled child? I was a troubled child. So believe me, I can totally relate to troubled children and what they're suffering. I know what's on their mind. I know what they're thinking. Because I was thinking the same thing. I disrespected authority because I didn't like to be told what to do. And each time I did it, I kept getting beat up, but I didn't care. I just said, you know what, you can beat me all you want, but, until you sit down and talk to me as a person, I'm not going to listen to a word you're saying. If you can't talk to me reasonably without hitting me, or forcing me to do things that I don't want to do, then I'm going to resent you. And that included my mother, and my teachers, police. I didn't respect anybody, because they didn't respect me. They didn't, and nobody would talk to me. Nobody would give me guidance, so I was a very disruptive child, and I was doing a lot of bad things, but by the time I was 16, when my brother died, that changed my life. I said, well, God came into my heart and told me, Jerry, you need to change your life, because you're going to either be dead or in jail. That's the trajectory you're on right now. I was doing drugs. So I'm, a year later, after my brother died, I joined the military. I became a combat medic during the Vietnam War. This is 1972. He died in 71. In 1972, I joined the military, and I became a combat medic. And this is when I finally started to realize my potential, because when I first went to be recruited, they give you an aptitude test. And on the test, they're trying to see how smart you are, Now they're asking all these questions, and I'm answering them. I don't know if I'm answering them correctly, and I'm giving it my best answer. So when the results came back from my test, the recruiter called me back. He was amazed. I'm saying, he said, you know something, you got really high scores on your aptitude test. I think the maximum was 100%. If you had 100%, you're virtually a genius. And so my score was, I think it was between 96 and 98%. And he was amazed. He said, you are really smart, And I didn't think I was that smart, because I was failing in school. I wasn't paying attention in school. I was very disruptive, very mischievous. I was always clowning around. But I guess somehow I must have learned something. But I had no idea that I was intelligent. This was like the first time I'm learning this, from the Army recruiter. And I'm saying, really? He says, yeah. He said, normally, people come in, they get maybe 65%, something like that, so, or they barely pass with 70%. He said, but you were up there in the 90s, man, 90, like 96 or 97%. I said, wow. I said, I was impressed, so he's impressed, I'm impressed, so he said, you could be whatever you want, medic, military police. You can be a scientist. Anything you want to be in the Army, you could be. I said, He said, normally people with low scores, they get to be cooks, they drive trucks, they do all the hard work, you know. He said, but, you know, you could be a specialist, you know, in your field. Whatever you choose to do, you have permission to do it from us because we see your potential. We know your potential, that how smart you are. So, so this is how I changed the trajectory of my life to get away from all this, the jungle that I was living in Brooklyn, New York, where murders, gangs, crime everywhere. I mean, violence everywhere. That's all I knew, you know. And I'm constantly being abused. I'm being beaten up by my mother, you know. After my father left when I was 6 years old, he was an alcoholic, you know. So I came from a very dysfunctional family, you know. Um, so I was always in trouble, you know. I was always being picked up by the police for doing something wrong, you know. By the time I was 16, I probably was picked up maybe 10 times. And my mother had to come to the police station to come and get me. They wouldn't prosecute me. They would just call my mother, you know, and she'd have to come and get me out of the police station, and I'd catch another beating, you know. But I was used to it. Beatings didn't bother me anymore because I had already developed an immunity to the beatings because I just didn't care. You know, I said, you know, if nobody cares about me, why should I care about me? I didn't care about myself, you know. So this made me very, very angry inside that, you know, that nobody would talk to me to put me on the right path, you know. But, you know, I'm like being hit for everything I do wrong, but nobody's explaining to me what I'm doing wrong or why I should do better. You know, they're not helping me through this. You know, and nobody's talking to me. I'm going to my priests. I'm going to my mother, my teachers. I'm trying to talk to everybody, telling them I'm having problems, but nobody's listening to me. They're just telling me, well, you got to do better. You know, saying, yeah, but help me do better. Help me. I'm begging you for help, but nobody will help me. Not even my mother. You know, I would tell her, you know, like if I'm having problems with math, you know, I'm saying, Mom, can you help me with the math? No, you better learn to do it. You know, she would hit me. You know, you're not leaving this table until you solve that problem. I'm saying, Mom, I'm crying. I'm crying as she's beating me. I said, Mom, I don't understand the problem. Can you explain it to me? Help me understand it. She wouldn't even help me with that. You know, so it was like things like that. And I'm saying, nobody wants to help me. You know, if I'm having a problem, why aren't you helping me? You know, so I understand the problem that children have. You know, that people don't care about them. You know, and when people stop caring about you, you stop caring about yourself, and then you start getting into trouble. It's just that simple. You know, if you don't have a nurturing environment where people care about you and love you and are concerned about your welfare and how you're progressing, if they're not concerned about that, then why should you be concerned about it? You know, and so I wasn't. You know, so like I said, whatever my friends were doing bad, I would do the same thing. I'm going to follow in their pattern. I'm going to do what they do. Same thing as my brothers and sisters, my older brothers and sisters. If they did bad things, I did bad things too. You know, I was a victim of my own environment. Whatever I saw people doing, I did the same things. So, you know, there were gangs, there was, you know, drugs, violence, you know, crime, stealing. I did all of that, you know. But by the time I was 16, my brother died. He was 18. That changed my life. So I put myself on a new trajectory because God put it in my heart telling me, you need to change your life because you're going to be dead or you're going to be in jail. One or the other. Something's going to happen to you, you know, and your life is not going down a good road. This is God talking to me, not nobody else. Nobody else is talking to me, but God's talking to me. And it's like I had a wake up call. I woke up and said, you know what? Yeah, I need to escape this madness, this endless violence that I'm surrounded by, in my environment in Brooklyn, New York, the streets of Brooklyn. I just, I mean, I was tolerating, I'm fighting my way through. I'm surviving it, barely, but not without being tortured to death, I mean, but I knew I had to escape this, so that's when I joined the military, and then I became a combat medic during Vietnam. And this is, I realized then this was my calling, to help people. Because, the recruiter told me you could be whatever you want. So I chose to be a combat medic. I said, I want to help people. I want to save lives if I can. Because I watched some of my friends, older friends, that already served in Vietnam, coming back with one leg, one arm, their face messed up, it's whatever. And I'm saying to myself, if I could do something to help those guys that are hurt, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to save lives. I want to save somebody's life. So that's what was in my heart. I wanted to do good. So I did. So I joined the Army, and my scores were so high, they said, you could be whatever you want. So I became a medic. And I excelled at being a medic. Out of a class of 100, I was in the top 10% of my class. So I was very good at what I did, saving lives. And I was in a lot of battles where, now they trained me in basic training to be, to fight, as, to kill. That's what they were training me in, basic training. But that's not why I joined the Army. I wanted to be the medic, But I had to go through basic training. And then after basic training, then they put me through the medical training, which took about 3 months. And I passed it with flying colors. I was in the top 10%. So I was very good at my job. And I was very devoted, because I realized how important it was that these people's lives are depending on me to save them. Because when they send out an infantry unit, there's only one medic, and that's me. So I'm the only guy that's there that could save their life. Sometimes I couldn't. Sometimes they were so far gone I couldn't even save them. All I could do was just comfort them. But a lot of times I saved plenty of lives. So I was very proud of this. That I was able to do this good work. So in 1974, I was discharged. That was my discharge date, September of 1974. And then a year later, it's when I was speaking with God. I'm speaking with God face to face. He just showed up, in December of 1975. He just showed up in my living room out of the blue, and I'm talking to God, and he's asking me a question: what do you want, in this life? And I just said, well, I don't want anything for myself, Lord. I said, but I do want to, understand your holy word. I want to understand. I want the knowledge about you. I said, I want to know the truth, about why are we here? What are we supposed to do? And I said, I want to use that to help other people. So that's what I did. So God said to me in response, He said, you will have that and so much more. I had no idea what he meant by that with so much more. But this is 49 years ago, so the 49 years of knowledge I accumulated through the grace of God, that He was pouring this knowledge into my heart allowing me to read His Word and able to comprehend it and comprehend the wisdom of what He was saying, that it was the truth, and and I was able to absorb it instantly. I mean, as I'm reading the Word, it was like a living Word to me. It was alive, and it was like I'm hearing God talking to me as I'm reading His words. It's like He's talking right to me, you know, and so I started to understand the Bible very well. I spent 49 years of my life researching all of the Bible, every detail in the Bible, all the prophecies and timelines and chronology, genealogy, dates of events. I could rattle off dates of events. You name it, I'll tell you what day it happened. You know, and the numerology of the prophecies. A lot of his prophecies are numerical prophecies. I'll give you an example. Like in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 to 27, he's giving you a 490-year prophecy. And he's telling you when Jesus Christ is going to come, on earth to do his ministry. He's giving you a date, but nobody can figure out that date, because they don't know when it begins. Like Daniel's telling this in like before, around when the temple was destroyed with 586. He was in Babylon, I think, in 606. So within this 20-year period, he's telling this prophecy, which is going to happen, 490 years, and then at the end of that time, then Jesus is going to show up and do his ministry. So this was a prophecy that I was like obsessed with figuring out, but I'm looking at the history books, and I'm trying to read what they're saying about this prophecy, but none of it made sense. It wasn't adding up to the timeline that he arrived. So I had to find out why is the history books are not matching the Bible date wise. So this became my first obsession. And then there was another prophecy with Abraham, I think it was in chapter 15 of Genesis, where God is giving a 400-year prophecy to Abraham. That was another numerical prophecy that I had to figure out, and I wanted to know what that meant and what God was trying to tell us, about events that are going to happen within a 400-year period. And then in Ezekiel, God tells Ezekiel about 430 years, that for 390 years, one part of Israel, the northern part of Israel, will suffer, and for 40 years, the southern part of Judah will suffer. So this is a 430-year prophecy. So I wanted to figure that one out too. So I need to understand the dates of when these events are going to happen. So it was very important for me to be able to calculate these dates and when they actually took place. So this is how I became such a good expert on the timelines and chronology of God's prophecies. I was very astute at calculating them, because part of my training that God gave me after I left the Army, I went into working at Wall Street doing accounting. So I became very good at mathematics, and so I was able to see patterns in the math. And as I'm seeing these patterns develop, it's showing me a timeline that's really broken down into pieces that are holy to God. These events are happening at holy moments in God's timeline. That each event is separated by a 490-year period, which coincided with Daniel's prophecy, 490-year prophecy. That 490-year prophecy comes up at least 8 times in other places in the Bible that people aren't aware of, that I'm aware of. That this 490-year difference was timelines between, let's say, when Noah was born. I'll give you the exact year when Noah was born. It's 2976 BC. But you got 1960 years after that. Just give me 1 second. Which is 4 times 490. 2976. I think this is when, I'm doing it on the calculator, but I already know what it is. This is when Solomon became king of Israel in 1016 BC. So 1960 years after Noah was born, King Solomon becomes king. This was a holy moment, But so now, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, wait, let me just divide, take away 1960 from 2976, which is Noah's birth. And then it said 1016. And I knew that it was 1016, but this confirmed it, because I'm saying, okay, there's the pattern showing up, this 490-year pattern that's being repeated. So I'm saying, okay, God's showing me a pattern in these prophecies that most people aren't aware of, but I'm aware of it because I know the dates. So, and then it took Solomon in his 3rd year, it says the 4th year, but he's in his 4th year, but he completed 3 years. So after 3 years, after that 3 years, on the 4th year, he started building the temple. Okay, so the temple wasn't completed until 7 years later. So it's really 10 years after 1016 that the temple was completed. So now I know the exact date of that when the temple was completed was 1006 BC. Okay, so now if you deduct another 490 years after that, guess what that equals? 516 BC. Okay, 516 BC was the exact year when the temple was rebuilt. Again, the 490-year period shows up. So I'm seeing these patterns of saying, yeah, there's something to this. God is doing something, and he's doing it in the 490-year intervals, but nobody's taking notice of it. But I am. I'm paying attention to it, so I kept seeing this showing up everywhere, this 490-year difference, in time. But there's other numerical prophecies that I could discuss with you. It would take me a long time to tell you about them, but I would love to discuss them. But I can give you a whole chronology from the beginning to the end. I can give you all the times and dates of everything that's in the Bible. I'll tell you exactly what year that happened. So the knowledge that I was getting from doing the accounting work for these brokerage firms in the stock market, that helped me in reconciling these dates. So I'm being trained now to do mathematics, but that mathematics is helping me understand the numerical prophecies that God is teaching me in the Bible. So God is training me in a lot of things. He's training me, first of all, he trained me to care about people's lives, to help people as a medic. Then now he's training me mathematics, which wasn't my greatest class in school. I was usually failing at math because I wasn't paying attention, But when I took these jobs in the stock market, I excelled in mathematics because I noticed that I started seeing patterns in the out of balance accounting. I could spot a problem, and I would know what the problem is we're talking about millions of dollars here, and I'm looking for like $150 that we're out of balance, and I could spot where that problem is just by looking at this thing. I could see a pattern there. So I'm realizing that I'm able to just look at something, I could see a pattern. So this was helping me in understanding God's prophecies. So God's training me, without me knowing it, He's training me. So then I started using that knowledge to reconcile the Bible versus man's recorded history of the Bible, which is so out of whack, but I was able to reconcile it, to put it in its proper place where I know the exact dates. Some of the dates they have are right, but not all of them. A lot of times they're guessing at dates, but I'm going to give you accurate dates. These are actual dates of when these things happen. So I became a prophecy expert on timelines, and so I understood what God was saying, what He was referring to, and the holy meanings behind these things, that this meant something. Now, why is the 490 so holy to God? I don't think anybody even realizes this, that prophecy in Daniel, the 490-year prophecy, which stands out like an elephant in a room, because it's the only one that's mentioning the 490. But it's so simple to understand why that number is holy to God, because that's the number of years of the Jubilee. Every 49 years, which is 7 times 7 years, is 49 years. 7 times 7, that's holy to God. Okay? So you just add zero to it. The zero doesn't mean anything. It's the 49 that means something. So this is, so I'm just, now I'm calculating, I'm figuring out, okay, so this is about the Jubilees period, 7 times 7 years. So this is not by accident that God is using 490-year periods. It's actually 10 times 10 times of a Jubilee. 490 years times 10, that's 490 years. That's 10 Jubilees. So I was able to apply this now to an entire timeline from the beginning to the end. And I understood what God was doing in His timeline. I know, like, when it began. So this is how I was able to establish the date of creation and the date of where eternity will begin, because it's divided by 49, believe it or not. So, but there's another number that goes with the 49. The other number is 144. Now, this number 144 actually appears in the first 2 verses or first 3 verses of the Bible in creation, when God's talking about the creation. In 6 days I created the heavens and the earth. On the 7th day I rested from all the work. But there's a clue in there that nobody is even noticing. I noticed it, but I'll tell you what it is. It's the actual creation was 6 days, not 7. 7th day God rested. The creation took place in 6 days. So if you multiply 6 days times 24 hours a day, that equals 144. I hope that sounds familiar to you, because in the book of Revelation, you got the 144,000, okay? And they're mentioned like 3 times in the book of Revelation, the 144,000. So there's a correlation there. And there's also a correlation with the 400-year prophecy that was given to Abraham in Genesis 15. If you multiply 400 years, and at the time, a year to God was a 360-day year. If you multiply 400 times 360, that equals 144,000, which is, I'm saying, well, this is not a coincidence. God's trying to give us a message here, but nobody's picking up on it. But I am. I'm picking up on it, because I'm doing the calculation. I'm saying, well, let me just multiply 400 times 360. What does that equal? It equals 144,000. That's not a coincidence. This is a holy prophecy that God is giving to Abraham. So I know it's holy. So I know that this is important to God, that these numbers mean something. So, and also when in the book of Revelation, where John is talking about the walls around the temple of God in heaven, because he's talking about the heavenly kingdom, and he's talking about the dimension of the walls, and he's saying that the walls are 144 cubits. Again, the number 144 comes up. Is that by coincidence? No. It's deliberate. God is deliberately trying to get your attention to pay attention to these numbers, because they're holy. They're holy to God. So, just like the 144,000 are holy to God, because they're pure, they're they're undefiled, okay? They're holy to God. So don't you think the number 144 is holy to God as well? Just like the 6 days of creation, that was 144 hours. Would you think that that's holy to God? Of course it is. When he's given the 400-year prophecy to Abraham, which is 144,000 days, is that holy to God? Of course it is. So now now remember I told you about the Jubilees, okay, the 49 years, okay. Now I've got that one holy number, the Jubilees, which keeps coming up throughout the timelines. Remember, from Noah all the way to King Solomon, and all the way actually to the Second Temple, and then all the way down to Jesus Christ. So from Noah to Jesus Christ, you got all these intervals of 490 years. So I'm saying, well, this got to mean something. So I know that the number 49 is holy to God because it's 7 times 7. So I know the number 144 is holy to God. It's mentioned at least 4 times in Revelation, and it's in the creation, but nobody knows it because it doesn't say it. It just said 6 days. Well, what's 24 hours times 6 days? That's 144 hours. Right? If you can't make that connection, something's wrong. But I'm not saying that everybody should make it. I'm just saying you should at least understand it. So now all I did was a simple calculation, and God has put it in my heart to do this. He's saying, Jerry, add these two together. Multiply 144 times 49. That'll give you my total timeline. And that's what I did. And that comes out to 7,056 years. And I said, now it's making sense. You're giving me your whole timeline from creation to eternity. It's 7,056 years. I figured it out. I said, it's 49, it's 144 Jubilees. 144 times 49, it's 144 Jubilees. Both of them are holy to God. So if it equals 7,056 years, well, that's got to be God's entire timeline, because we're talking about a 7 millennium timeline period. Now, there's an extra 56 years, but I can explain why. But I don't have time for that right now. But you're asking me why I'm a good candidate for this job. Well, first of all, you know my experiences with the police athletic club, taking care of boys, and with the boys clubs that I worked with. I was a troubled child. Okay, I'm very familiar with troubled children. My heart bleeds for them because I was just like them, and through the grace of God, I was able to remove myself from that environment, only through His grace. Now, what am I doing now today? Today, I'm going to show you something. Hope you could read it. It's called Kairos. Okay, this is a program for prisons. Okay, where we go into. I'm a chaplain. Okay, I'm actually a volunteer there. We go into prisons and we we bring the word of God to the prisoners there. That these are prisoners that are ready to re-enter into um, society. They're coming out of jail. Okay. Now this is not only adults, but this is also youths. So these are children that are in juvenile detention, and we have adults that are coming out of they're coming out and they're going out back into society. So one of our primary missions is to connect them with Jesus Christ. So we go there and we have meetings and we preach the word of God to them. We communicate the word of God to them, and we talk to each individual individually, and we talk to them about God and Jesus, and how He's there to save them, and how their sins are forgiven, and how they can move forward with their lives, and then our next thing is to guide them into re-entering into society to become better people. That's our mission. Okay, so this is what I'm doing now. Okay, this is also, you're asking me a question about, what I do for church. Well, excuse me. Basically, this is my church, the prison. Um, so this takes up a lot of my time, but I have a church that's not even a half a block away from me. It's a Baptist church, and I'm more of the Baptist Methodist denomination, but I'm really not. I'm a non-denominational pastor, but my tenets are more leaning towards baptism, and the Methodists the Methodist theology is that everybody is saved through the blood of Jesus Christ. Baptism, which I also believe is important, is the cleansing. So these are two tenets of mine which I hold very dear. So because of those two tenets, I relate more closely to the Baptists and the Methodists because of those two tenets. That's it. Growing up, I was baptized a Catholic. I received communion as a Catholic. I was confirmed a Catholic. So I went through that for 13 years. And so from early childhood, I was already involved in the church. And I knew all the prayers and everything like that. So it was never that I was unfamiliar with God. There was never a time where I was unfamiliar with God. From my youth. So when I'm 7 years old, I was receiving communion. And by 13 years old, I was confirmed as a Catholic. But I didn't really believe in the Catholic Church. I'm a Protestant. I don't believe in the Catholic Church. I'm against the Catholic Church. But I understand what they're doing, but I don't condone what they're doing. I think that a lot of what they do is basically evil, because we're talking about the Roman Catholic Church, the same Romans who crucified Jesus Christ and were killing Christians for over 324 years before Constantine decided to create the Roman Catholic Church. So now all of a sudden they're going to be the guardians of Christianity after you just spent almost half a century killing Christians. I find that kind of, you know, sort of hypocritical, to say that you're going to be the divine leaders of Christianity after all you've done to kill it. But through them, we were able to get the Bible, even though they edited the Bible, took out books that they didn't want in the Bible. If you look at the Septuagint Bible compared to the Bible we have now, it's a lot of books missing from the Bible. But as for me, I research all biblical writings. So I've read Josephus, I've read Septuagint Bible, the Latin Bible, the Vulgate, you name all the Bibles. Okay, so so I'm familiar with all the books that are deleted, and I've also read all the Gospels that were deleted as well. Which the church didn't deem that they were necessary to be in there. I'm saying, well, who are you to decide what should be in there? But I know that this is all God's plan. God planned it. This is the Bible we're going to be learning from. So God allowed that to happen, so then that's the way it should be. But that doesn't mean that that's all the information. There's plenty more information that we're not being told that's in other books, which I've read them all. Okay, so I'm very familiar, especially the book of Maccabees. There's 4 books of Maccabees that are in the Septuagint Bible that tell you a whole new story that people are not even close to being familiar with, that's very important and it's very holy, but that's been deleted, but I'm familiar with it. So that's why I'm trying to tell you, all these events that took place, I know what happened, because I have all the information from all sources. I consolidated it all. And I got a lot of it from Usher. And he wrote The Annals of the World. And he wrote that book, I think it was like in the 16th century. Or 17th century, 1605, something like that. And but what he wrote was a lot of good information, but he was just a little bit off on his calculations, but he was very close. So his information was very valuable to me. It wasn't always perfect, but he gave me more insight to be able to reconcile, to find the errors, So he was close, but he wasn't right there. But at least I was able to see where the differences was. So I was able to again, that was my job down in Wall Street, was to reconcile the differences, why we're out of balance. That was my function. I was an expert at that. People from different brokerage houses were fighting over me to get me to come and work for them because I was one of the best in my field. It's called troubleshooting. To find problems and fix them, financial problems that are in the books, that the books are out of balance. So that was my expertise. So that's what I did best. So I'm not saying this is all important for the job that you're talking about. I'm just talking about how I became so knowledgeable about the Bible and everything, and how I was able to change my life, from being a troubled child, to a really bad troubled child, to serving the Lord, so, a complete transition, and all through the grace of God, who speaks with me all the time. He's speaking to me right now, he's always speaking to me, so. But am I good with kids? I'm an expert with kids. I love children, and I love to want to help them because I don't want them to suffer the same thing I suffered. I don't want to see them go down that path. I don't want them to end up like my brother, dead of an overdose because they got in with a bad crowd and just were doing drugs. I don't want to see that happen to another child. ever. So I love children, and I can relate to what their problems are because I went through the same thing. I'm thinking the same thing they're thinking. I know what they're thinking. I know the resentment that they have. I understand why they're acting out, because I did the same thing. I was just like them. I'm, believe me, we're twins, me, I'm just like them, but not anymore. But I was just like them until my brother died. That's when I changed my life. But and I have God to thank for that because there was no one else that was helping me. But God was talking to me, telling me that I need to change. So you asked me about why I think I'm a good candidate. I think I'm an expert candidate, for this job because I can relate to these children. I like group therapies. That's another thing that I like to do. I like to have the children talking with each other, and and I'm taking notes of what they're saying. But I like to prompt them, create scenarios, and have them discuss them. You know, so this is where I kind of wing it on my own. I just bring up things that we could talk about that I'm hoping will prompt them to talk about something that might be bothering them. Um, and another thing that I'm great at, which I love, the baddest kid in the class, that's probably one of my favorite kids in the class. Because this guy, I'm impressed with him. I'm going to tell you why I'm impressed with him. Because he thinks he's very smart, he thinks he's very clever, and he thinks that he knows it all. And I'm impressed with that because he has confidence in himself that, hey, I know it, I know what's going on. I'm a tough guy. Yeah, okay. To me, I get a kick out of that because that's who I thought I was. I thought I was a tough guy. I thought I was uh, the clever one, smart one. I was always wisecracking. And I thought I was the slickest one in the room. So when I look at them, it's like I'm looking at myself. I'm saying, yeah, okay, you're just like me, so I know how to handle you, because I know what's going through your mind, you know. I said, but in reality, you're really scared. But you're putting on this facade that you're a tough guy so that you can make people think that you're not afraid of anything. But meanwhile, in your heart is breaking because of all the bad things that have happened to you. But you're not going to tell that to anybody because you're too, proud to let that slip out. But I can relate to you, so I know how to talk to you, you know, because I know what's going through your mind. I know what you're thinking. I know why you're thinking it. That you're better than everybody else, because you don't want to listen to anybody else, you know, and you despise everybody else, because you feel like everybody's abandoned you, so you had to take on the strength for yourself to be strong for yourself. So that's why you're so confident in yourself. I love that about you. I'm glad that you're confident. That's the best thing that you could be. You need that kind of confidence in order to keep going forward. You need that kind of strength to keep going forward. So I'm impressed with that. That impresses me because that means you have the character to do whatever you want to do. You have that ability. You have that strength to do that. So I'm impressed with you just because you think you're above everybody else. I love that confidence in you. But I want to use that confidence to do positive things instead of negative things. I want to turn you around and show you, listen, you can use that same energy, that same confidence, and do better, and really do well in your life. If you just used it positively instead of negatively, instead of using that same energy that you're using to get people angry at you, you can use that same energy to get people to love you and see what a great person you are. Because I know inside of you there's a heart of gold, but on the outside, you're hurt and you're traumatized. So you had to develop this bravado to protect yourself. So I understand what you're doing. I get why you're doing this. You know. So, am I a good candidate for this job? You tell me. But I think I'm an expert at this job. That's what I believe. Because I know I'm one of them. I am one of them. This is like if you were in a rehabilitation facility, you know who they get to teach these classes in the rehabilitation facilities? Ex junkies, okay? Because they're going to tell their story about, you know what, I went through the same thing you did, and I was able to get out of it, and this is how I did it. That's who's teaching those classes in rehabilitation. Ex junkies, okay? So I'm an ex trouble kid, so who's the greatest who understands you better than somebody who's been in the same place where you are? Nobody can understand you better than somebody who's been through what you've been through. That's what makes me the best at this job, because I've been through 100 times worse what you've been through. What you've been through is nothing compared to what I've been through. You haven't been through war. You haven't been a police officer. You don't know what it's like to be out in those streets, and having people trying to kill you. You have no idea what that's like. But I do. And but I consider that a service. This is I'm putting myself on the line for other people. You know, but you're only out for yourself. So but if you took that same energy and started helping other people and at the same time helping yourself, you're going to become successful. You're not going to wind up dead, and you're not going to wind up in jail, which is the last place I want to see you at. Which is what the conclusion that I reached when I was 16. I'm saying this has to end. This madness has to end. I have to change my life. I have to go on a different trajectory. I got to get out of this jungle that I'm in. This environment of Brooklyn, New York. These streets are terrible. There's nothing but murderers, gangs, junkies, criminals, sexual molesters. I mean, there's nothing but evil all around me. I'm saying I got to get away from this. And I've got to find a better way. So this is like, imagine the Garden of Eden. You got the tree of knowledge, good and evil. In order to understand what good is, you got to really understand what evil is. You can't understand evil without understanding good, and the same thing and vice versa. You can't understand good without understanding what evil is. So I went through the first phase of understanding what evil is, and I despised it. And I was able to move away from it because I said, no, that's not my choice. My choice is not to be evil. My choice is to be good. Okay, so I made that choice when I was 16. But you see what I'm trying to say? I'm giving you a comparison. Like, it's almost beneficial that you know these things now. So now you have an opportunity to make a choice. Do you want to stay that way? Or do you want to change it? Do you despise this lifestyle? Or do you want to progress into a better lifestyle? Something that you'll like and be happy with, and not depressed and always, with a broken heart, of what you're suffering. Wouldn't you rather be on the good side or on the evil side? Now that's the ultimate question. What side do you want to be on? Do you want to be evil or do you want to be good? Same question at the Garden of Eden. God gave them a choice. He put that tree in front of them for a reason. Choose. Do you want to be evil or do you want to be good? But in order to know what's evil and good, well, you got to eat from that tree first. And then now you're going to know the difference between good and evil. But before that, they were innocent. They didn't know nothing what was good and evil. So God literally wanted that to happen so that they can know the difference between good and evil. How else can you know the difference unless you experience it? You have to experience it in order to understand it. So if you're a person that's never been abused, never been taking drugs, never been around death, or anything like that. If you had a cushy life, and you went to school, and all you did was go to school and nothing ever happened to you, are you the kind of person that should be teaching these children, or the person that really experienced the same thing that they did? Who's better qualified to do that? It's got to be me. It's got to be me. I am an expert at what they went through because I went through it myself. So it's just like I said, at the rehabilitation center, you're talking to an ex-alcoholic or an ex-heroin addict. Okay? Alcoholics Anonymous. What do you think that's all about? Those are all people that are ex-drinkers. They're not drinking anymore. So, you're talking to people who have been through what you've been through. So those are the experts because they know what you're going through. So what better candidate can you have than somebody who knows exactly what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what's hurting you, what you've gone through, If you haven't experienced it, then how are you able to relate to it? This is like, excuse me. Imagine a parent losing a child. Okay, imagine that for a moment. My mother lost my son, my brother. Now, I have 3 daughters. They're all alive. They're fine. They're great, and they're wonderful daughters. I raised my children well. Completely opposite of the way I was raised. I raised them with love, and I never hit my kids either, But imagine a parent losing a child. Now, if you don't have children, you can't imagine what's going on in her mind. This mother who lost a child. You can't. You might try to imagine it, but you can't. Unless you experience it yourself, you're not able to relate to what's going on in her head. Because you don't know, because you don't have your own child. So how are you able to relate to somebody that you've never experienced this? You can't. You don't have that knowledge or the experience this happening. If you've never gone through it, then how are you able to talk to other people about it? This is what Vietnam veterans won't talk to other people about what happened in Vietnam. We have no problem talking to each other about it because we understand each other. We know what we went through. We know that it was all about watching out for each other. But people don't get that. People don't get that. That was our main mission, was watching over each other to make sure my friend doesn't get killed. So I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure he doesn't get killed. And I know he's doing the exact same thing, doing everything in his power to make sure I don't get killed. That's what soldiers are all about. We're all about protecting each other, okay? But you couldn't know that unless you were there, You have no idea what that's like, You see in the movie, you see people shooting guns, they killing you. It looks like glory, all that stuff. But until you're there, in that combat situation where people are shooting at you and trying to kill you, and the only person you have to rely on is the guy next to you, and he's relying on you, then you'll never know what that's like, And I can't talk to you about it because you can't relate to it. You have no idea what that's like. So that's why most Vietnam veterans won't talk to people about their experience. They won't share it with them because they know you don't understand it. I could tell it to you, but you won't understand it. You won't understand what we were feeling, what we were going through. So what's the point of telling you that, if you weren't there, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. See, that's the point I'm trying to make. I was there, so I know what you're talking about. So I can relate. So I can talk to any Vietnam veteran, and believe me, in 2 seconds we're compatible. Like, believe me, we know what we're talking about because we were there. We know what we went through. So does that make me an expert candidate for this job? Absolutely, absolutely. Unless you can find somebody else that's been through what I've been through, the same thing as these troubled children. If you can find somebody better than that, then by all means, hire them. But I don't think you can find anybody that's gone through what I've gone through and ended up where I am as an ordained minister, okay, helping people, saving people, not just their lives, but spiritually saving them, through Jesus Christ our Lord. So if you can find somebody better than that, then hire them. But if they don't have the kind of experience that I have, then you've got an amateur. You got a person who they say it's lip service. They're giving lip service. They're reading from some book. Okay, well, he's got psychotic disorder. They're writing down his disorders rather than talking to him about his problems and fixing them, helping him fix them. Everything to them is clinical rather than actual relation. I'm actually relating to you physically and mentally and heartfully what you're going through. I know what you're going through because I've been through it. So that's my pitch. I don't know any other way to say it. Am I a devoted person?